Hi, everybody. It's Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Soike with For Better For Worse.
And Lisa Bataska with Canine Defined.
Today, we're going to be talking about cognitive decline with Katie Trujillo, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her background. But let us know you're there. One of the things that those of us that our dogs don't live very long. However, for those of us that are very lucky that get our dogs to be old dogs for a while, we notice some cognitive decline in some dogs and not others. So this is a great way for us to try to understand a little bit more about what we can do and how we can help things and how we can manage things, manage it in our dogs. Anyway, Katie, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and all that great stuff?
So I'm one of Joanne's students at her training facility. I have 3 dogs in nose work and 1 in obedience. Always a work in progress. But for this program, I teach at St. Ambrose University. I'm a professor in the psychology department, and I have been there 30 years. I teach courses in women and aging, cognitive development, health psychology, and lifespan development. I think that's it. And my background is in research and teaching and not in clinical psych because I don't like people enough to do that. So I don't want to hear your problems.
So tell us a little bit about some of the work you do on, because I know we have a few students that from on the human side that are a little more mature, and they're starting to try to do things to keep keep themselves sharp.
Yeah.
And things like that. And for us, like, we'd be interested to know, like, what are some of the things people can do, but also how can we do that with, how can we translate that to our dogs, right?
Sure. I mean, we're aging right alongside our dogs. Our dogs are just aging at a faster rate, right? So, and we want to do everything we can for ourselves so that we can be good handlers and good, pet owners. But then we want to be able to give our dogs, the best experience possible as they're getting older. So, so one of the things to kind of consider is that the brain is just a physical part of our body, right? So what happens to our body affects our brain. So when we talk about cognitive aging, we got to consider what's our health like. So the degree to which we can keep ourselves healthy, we're keeping our brain healthy as well. So, how much do we exercise? What kinds of foods are we eating? Are we smoking? Are we, drinking lots of alcohol, binge drinking on the weekends? Just all those things. And how much are we challenging ourselves cognitively, right? So when we look at that in terms of dogs, we can think, okay, well, we want our dogs to have a healthy diet, not eat junk food, whatever the equivalent is for dogs. We want them to get a good amount of exercise, on a regular basis without overdoing it, avoid injuries. When we think about things like when we have health problems, injuries, things like that, it sort of limits what we can do. So if our dogs get injured, it limits what they can do. They can no longer exercise regularly. They can no longer have the social outings that they have. Yeah, I don't know if do you want me to get into a little bit about the like the cognitive functions
Yes,
that
please.
actually decline? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's so people can
Yeah.
understand how it happens. Because Kim has a question about her dog going blind, which goes back to the health, but it's like, how does it
Sure.
happen? How does cognitive decline happen? And because it, like I
Sure.
said, our physiology is very similar. So
Sure. So the areas of the brain that decline sort of noticeably, first of all, the first general thing is we get slower, not just like how fast we can move, like how fast we can run or whatever, but also like how quickly we can come up with stuff, how
Is
quickly
that
we
like,
can.
is that like when, what did I come in this room for? I forgot.
Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
Or what's the name of this stupid thing? I can't think of the name of that stupid
Okay.
thing. Or I was just reading this and I have no idea where I just read it. Those just, like the wheels turn a little slower. So, and of course that happens with dogs too, right? My 11-year-old elite dog is having a little bit more. She takes a little bit more time to work out nose work problems. I mean, it just you can
Sure.
see her like kind of having to think for a little bit longer than she used to, which is fine. I mean, she's 11, so. But the hippocampus is involved in like learning and memory. So converting something into a long-term memory where we can access it later, that shows some decline with age. So we could expect, and we see that in dogs too. So we could expect our dogs maybe to take a little bit longer time learning, new things as they get older, maybe being a little bit more forgetful, not accessing information, maybe tricks that they used to know. It's like, oh yeah, that one. If you haven't had them practice that one in a long time, maybe they aren't going to remember that. And then the prefrontal cortex. So that's the area of your brain that's involved in what we call executive function. So it's things like attention, how long can we stay focused? How well can we switch from one task to another, sort of that multitasking thing. Trying to think, just deciding how to solve a problem. So that's all sort of executive function. So we see that decline with age. So we might see like our dogs having a little bit more difficulty with focusing, right? They might get a little more distractible. They might not switch as quickly from one thing to another thing. They might take a little bit longer, maybe resist switching focus. So, and all of that happens because, so it's so the neurons, we're not really losing neurons. So neurons are the brain cells that they communicate with each other and allow us to think. And it's not so much that we're losing brain cells as much as we're losing the connections between those brain cells. And so anytime we're doing something harmful to ourselves physically or mentally, we can potentially damage the pathways. So that's kind of what happens with age. And we can also lose something called myelin, which is, you've heard of myelin before. It's a fatty substance that makes neurons communicate more quickly and more efficiently. So we do lose a little bit of myelin as we get older too. So, I mean, and this is all different from like disease process because there are demyelinating diseases where like an autoimmune, So you lose the myelin, and as you lose, because your immune system is attacking it, and then it starts to affect random things, and how quickly and efficiently and how well you can do those things. So yeah.
So in people, how do you? Well, I know there's diet is one way of protecting that myelin.
Yeah.
What's the other? What are other? Because I know a couple of one of my students, I believe, is trying to learn another language because it's supposed to keep her brain
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so there's the use it or lose it, right? So when we're not using certain pathways, they have a tendency to fall away, but also we can sort of encourage our brains to function optimally by challenging it. So, that's where things like learning a new language come in. So things that are new to us, that are challenging to us, um, have the potential to slow cognitive decline. Um, People talk about crossword puzzles. Crossword puzzles are great, but after a while, you start to get really good at them.
Mhm.
And so then they're not as challenging, right? So, whereas like I'm doing Duolingo, which is not really learning a new language, but it sort of is, I spend like about 3 minutes a day doing it. But there's always a new level, there's new vocabulary, there's new things to learn about the new language. And it's always a new level of challenge, right? Whereas with a crossword puzzle,
Yeah.
it's not that new level of challenge each.
Mm.
Unless you're my mom and you make sure and get the Sunday New York Times, because that one's really hard.
Yeah, that one's really hard.
But you do start to figure out how to process those and how to manipulate
Yeah.
those. Yeah.
Like I don't know if you guys do connections. Do you do that?
I just started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get these random words, and you have to figure out which sets of 4 words go together in some way, like they're related to each other. So there's 4 sets of 4 words. And, I'm starting to learn some of the tricks, like, oh, in some cases, like this is the suffix of a word, or like this is a scrambled version of color words. You
Right.
start to learn all the tricks of how these things could be related. So you get better at it. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I do the apps like Elevate and all that gives you different problems and stuff like that all the time at different.
yeah. So
Um,
I sent Joanne.
Yeah, I'll put it up there.
So it's called Brain HQ, and there's a free version and a paid version, and you can do it. You can do it on the website, or there's an app for it. But the nice thing about that one is you identify like what area of cognition you're most interested in working on. So I'm interested in working on my attention, for example, or I'm interested in working on my memory. And so it will give you a game that's focused on that
those
particular
things.
thing.
Okay.
And then it'll it tracks your level of challenge and tries to make it more challenging as you go. So the idea is that you don't stall out at a particular level and like
Yeah.
get really
Just
good at that. It just keeps challenging on.
Yeah. So let me ask you for like dogs. I know we like to keep our dogs, like some of us that do sports and whatnot,
Mhm.
or people that they just like to do activities. Because here's what happens: a lot of people, and I've seen this more recently. They just he's old, so they stop doing stuff.
Yeah,
And they usually end up dying sooner
yeah.
because
Well,
their brain.
I mean, so, and this is a consideration for us too. Like, I wouldn't want to pick doing an activity that I hated, right?
Mhm.
So
Sure.
just like with a dog, yeah, you want to keep them challenged. You want them to be, you want to first and foremost keep them as healthy as you possibly can, give them as much activity as is healthy. But then what activities do they enjoy? And
Sure.
so that challenge part becomes a little bit tricky because it's like, well, this is a good challenge for you. And the dog's like, no, I don't want to do that, right?
Right.
I'm just going to lay here and take my nap. That's stupid. So,
Yeah. I totally. Yep. Totally. And
so we do have to kind of consider like, what does the
right.
dog feel like doing?
Right.
But other things with the dogs, in addition to just those cognitive challenges, like even so with humans, social interaction is a newer area where we're finding that social interaction is really important to cognitive function. And so it is good to keep ourselves engaged with other people.
Mhm.
And I know that I have a dog that could never have a dog friend, but there actually is some research showing that dogs that have dog friends, that helps their cognitive function as they get older. Um, and if you think about it, it's like, um, it's just using a different part of your brain, right? When you have
Sure.
those social
Mhm.
interactions. But I have a dog that,
Yeah.
she's,
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
so because we were just talking, we were at I spent most of the weekend with friends, and we were just talking about how, and when we're younger, we would be going out and wanting to be with people, which I always do that. I always like that. So I
Mhm.
still haven't. That hasn't changed much for me as I've gotten older. I just do enjoy alone time a little bit more. But
Yes.
I do have a hard time not having social interaction. So, but other people,
Mm.
Amy mentioned, she goes, I used to love to go out and be with people, and now I like it a lot less, which I'm guessing is pretty normal, right? As
Yeah, so there's this thing called socio-emotional selectivity theory, and all it means is that we get pickier about who we hang out with as we get older. We
Yes.
want to be around the people that we like, and that's okay. I mean, it's good to be in social interactions where maybe it's challenging your brain a little bit. So maybe I saw Nancy, you were part of a book club. So, that's a way of being social with people while also just kind of being in a more challenging kind of environment. But you don't have to do that like every
No,
day.
no, and that's why we our book club is loose. Like we only meet every 3 months but mostly because of our schedule.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah.
But at least, yeah, and for me that was just a different it was a different social setup for me, right? Because
Yeah.
my whole life is around dogs and dog
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
and I still
Yeah.
love being around the dogs and dog people. However, I would like to I would like to challenge my brain to do, and I speak another language, and now with my mother-in-law being in hospice, I speak. I'm going between both languages a lot more, and I feel like it's my second language. Well, technically my first language, which is Spanish, has gotten better and better now that I've had to use it a lot more because
Mhm.
before I used to be like, couldn't remember the word in Spanish for whatever it
Yeah.
was, and now I'm like, oh, but it came back very, very quickly, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
really fast.
Yeah.
So so I don't know if that helps because it's not a new language for me. It's just I'm
Well,
using
but
it.
you're not allowing those pathways to fail, right? You're keeping those pathways strong. And I was telling Joanne a little bit about this. I had read a study recently about diversity of activity. So what they did was they had people just throughout the day mark down all the activities they engaged in. So I brushed my teeth, I listened to a podcast, I went to dog class, I went to work, I, stopped at the grocery store. And they found that people with a wider range of activities that they engaged in throughout the day were actually doing better cognitively. Now, whether that's they're doing those things, they're doing more activities because they're better off cognitively, or doing those activities are making them better cognitively, we don't know that for sure. But
Yep. So we're getting quite a few questions on dogs that have lost sight, right? So
mm,
can you talk a little bit, maybe, I mean, from the human perspective, right? As maybe people who are blind or people who have lost something. Is there any studies on that, or how do
well,
they?
so anytime you lose some of your sensory function, whether it's hearing or sight, those would be the most debilitating for people. And certainly for dogs. I don't know what happens loss of smell there is some loss of smell with age, but sight and hearing are usually the ones we see a lot of. So anytime you lose sensory input from one of your senses, it does affect your brain negatively. So with a dog that's gone blind, they now do not have that visual input. And so it does have a possibility of speeding cognitive decline. What could you do? Challenge the other senses is really, that's what you would do for a human.
So let me ask you, because we have a client, I have a dog that was never sighted, like she never was able to see.
Yeah.
So she's blind. So she's navigating her world pretty well, given that she never, so I guess if you never had that input, then you just work with what you got, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So the areas of the brain that would be involved in the senses that the dog is relying on would presumably be thicker, larger, that you would have more brain volume because of the reliance on that particular area. So, somebody who reads Braille would have, their MRIs might show some additional brain volume in the sensory motor areas, because of the using the fingers. So, is that dog going to be cognitively worse off? It's hard to say because, like with people, so if somebody is deaf, let's say, they don't get they get social interaction within their group. So other people who can sign, they're cut off from other people. For some people, that can affect cognitive development, but not for everybody. It depends on how they live their lives. So, yeah.
So I hate to, I hope this isn't a big change here, but like, I know you and I talked about, right, that like amyloid proteins.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about, number one, what that is, what increases those, what they're used for, and, what that does to the brain?
Yeah. So, amyloid proteins, they just, they're there in the brain. Normally, there's enzymes that can dissolve the amyloid protein before it has a chance to build up. As we get older, our ability to do that decreases. So it used to be thought that amyloid protein, if it was present, you were in the process of developing Alzheimer's disease. Now we don't really think that anymore. While it's the case that if you look at the brain, if you after the person dies, you do an autopsy, you look at their brain, and you see that there's this buildup of amyloid protein, and they had symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, you say, okay, that the amyloid protein. So what happens is, as this amyloid, beta amyloid builds up, it damages the neurons. And there's also this second protein. And so in dogs, there's an equivalent where there's amyloid protein that builds up on neurons and they get canine cognitive dysfunction, which is similar to Alzheimer's. What they don't have is a buildup of tau, which is another protein, and that causes nerve fibers to become tangled. And so that's a secondary process that's going on in Alzheimer's disease. There is no way to dissolve it. There's no way to give, that we know of right now, to give a medication that will dissolve it. There's no way to surgically remove it. So whatever amyloid protein has built up in our brain, we're sort of stuck with it. There is some evidence we can slow the development of amyloid protein. And again, that goes back to what are the things that keep us healthy. So I mean, we can get into kind of deep into this, talk about oxidative stress and, I don't think we want
Well,
free radicals and stuff like that, right? But and then you start dabbling into the nutrition and the health. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, I mean, so they're antioxidants, right? Are it's basically like vitamin C, beta carotene, vitamin E.
Omegas, right?
Huh?
Omegas as well, right?
Omegas. So those are going to fight oxidative stress. So just think of oxidative stress, something that happens to our bodies, happens to molecules, and it just can result in damage. So in all throughout our body, cause gray hair and wrinkled skin and damage to neurons. So, but there's not super strong evidence that just taking antioxidant pills is going to stop the buildup of amyloid protein or stop the process of oxidative stress. But we do see that we can slow some of these things, whether it's cognitive aging or the process of, our heart having changes or whatever, that we can slow that down by engaging in healthy activities. So, so the kinds of, so dietary things that are actually very strongly related to cognitive health and physical health, avoiding saturated fats, avoiding sugar. Those both do a lot of damage to the body and the brain. The Mediterranean diet for humans is considered the most heart healthy and brain healthy diet. So the Mediterranean diet is like lean meats, lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of grains, olive oil. Sometimes you see the little glass of red wine next to pictures of the Mediterranean diet. So, but not a fifth of whiskey or something like that.
No.
So, but so I don't. So I cannot really tell you why, like a particular diet is better than another diet. I mean, there's certain aspects of those diets that we know why they might work, but why does taking antioxidants not help us? I don't know. There's just not strong evidence that it does.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's because it's not regulated, so you don't know if you're getting,
Well, there is that too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a problem.
So, is there a factor of like stress and environment on all of that as well?
Yep.
Yes. So stress is very aging.
Yep. I feel you, sister.
Yes, stress is very aging, and that's true for our dogs as well. If we have really sensitive dogs, I mean, yeah, sure, getting them out and about and having all these great enriching activities, it's great. But if they're stressed out by it, then not so great.
So I have a question. So Netflix had a movie out or a show out called "You Are What You Eat," the twin experiment.
Oh yeah,
I saw that.
Yeah,
yes, it was like, oh, I should go completely vegan. I'm like, I don't know if I can, but
well, it was like in that one, the Mediterranean diet went out.
Yeah. I thought it was fascinating, and if you haven't, for the viewers, if you haven't seen it, it's a really interesting look at. Well, maybe you can explain it a little bit more, like what they did, because I'm assuming you're familiar with it since your area, right?
Yeah. So they took twins and randomly assigned them to either have a vegan diet or a Mediterranean diet, because both of those diets are considered really healthy, and they wanted to see how these diets would change, physiological markers of health And I forget how many weeks they track them.
Yeah.
But
I thought it was 3 months, I thought, but
yeah, that sounds right.
Wasn't it also because they're the most genetically same? Like,
Well,
yes.
It was identical versus fraternal, right?
Right.
So they did identical.
Right. So if you get identical twin pairs, the idea is that they're genetically identical. So anything, any differences between them would be due to the environment. So that was, sorry, I left that part out.
No.
So yeah. And so they had a bunch of physiological measures, and I think they looked at cholesterol and
for women,
muscle.
Libido, which was
libido.
Libido.
That was fascinating. That was fascinating. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's a small scale study, right? I mean, there are larger longitudinal studies that show that the Mediterranean diet is really the winner long term. So they follow people over time and look at how it impacts them. So, you mentioned women and libido, and I do want to mention menopause because when we go through menopause, and I'm assuming that a lot of viewers are women, so our estrogen levels really just plummet, right? For a little while, they're up and down, and then they just kind of drop off the face of the earth. So, I mean, we still end up with some estrogen, but some women will feel foggy, like they just feel like, oh my God, I just can't think, I'm forgetting things and I can't concentrate. And, initially the thought was, oh, well, of course you're having hot flashes all the time. Like, how can you concentrate and you're not sleeping very well? But there is evidence that cognitive scores, so when you give cognitive tests to women who are in the throes of this menopausal transition, they actually go down. But then after you've been in menopause for a few years, they rebound and you're back to where you were. So if anybody thinks they're crazy, they're not.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So how does that look? I mean, if we're thinking about in terms of dogs, right? So dogs are being, their hormones are being pulled away and so forth at an early age, depending on where you're getting them from. What does that look like in terms of, the brain and, how it's going to affect the cognitive aspect of dogs?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that over the last couple of days because I recently adopted a dog that was neutered at 3 months of age. And, so that's really, really, really early. And that was not my preference. I adopted him after he was neutered. But so one of the things to consider is like, well, is there a difference in cognitive function between men and women? Or is there a difference in cognitive function between male and female dogs? There are some differences in what our strengths are, but whether that's due to hormones or not is unclear because, at least in the United States and many countries, girls and boys are raised differently. We're not raised to be interested in math and science and that kind of stuff. So women do a little bit better in language areas. Men do a little bit better in the visual spatial areas. I don't know whether that exists in dogs. I have actually no clue. But, so would it affect their cognitive potential? I have no idea. I don't know the extent to which sex hormones relate to, the development of the brain.
I think that's really interesting. Somebody should do a thesis on that, right? So
there's probably research out there. I just don't know,
Well, because I think, right, like all of us that have owned dogs for any given period of time, and we've owned both sexes. I mean, and tell me if I'm wrong, guys, and viewers too, right? But the thought is females mature faster when you're going through adolescence, right? They seem to get it. They seem to be able to train and focus faster than the males do, right? And then once they hit 3, I think it evens out between both sexes.
Yeah.
For most females anyway. But yeah. That's just interesting because I mean, to me, I think at least with the 4 of us here, right? I'm guessing there's an agreement upon that. I sure think so.
Yep, I would agree.
I mean,
I have I do notice a difference. So I have 2 dogs who are spayed or neutered earlier than I noticed, right? And then there's other dogs who are like 3 of my males are still intact. 2 of my females I spayed later on as they got older. But you can also see developmental issues across the board, which I think everybody knows in terms of musculature and all that.
Yeah.
And the health of the dog seems to be more. Even the brain, though, it's, I don't remember even my 8-month-old compared to the 1.5-year-old recent acquisition. There's such a difference in, there's more, the 8-month-old, he's still intact, and he seems to have more, wits about him compared to the other one. It's crazy. And granted, there's an external factor of raising, right? Because the other one that recently came to me has a whole different way about raising. And I do think that is huge as well, impactful in terms of environment. Yes.
Oh yeah. I mean, the part of cognitive aging we can't control, and the part of, cognitive function is, anything that happened to us prenatally or how we were raised as children. I mean, that is very impactful, but obviously we can't change how things happened early on. And the same with, anytime you have a rescue dog, you just can't change those early experiences. And I have no doubt that my stressy dog would cognitively be better off without that stressiness. And it was absolutely due to early life experiences.
Right. So now this goes, my other question is, I know nowadays, a lot of people are on antidepressants and for mental health issues. And now we also have the ability to help our dogs that are a little anxious or worried, and putting them on, drugs to help them, with anxiety and things like that for the severe cases. And I know, I remember this with Lisa and one of her dogs. They put him on a meds, and they said, well, that's going to affect his, how he ages and all that. Well, he lived to be what?
Yeah, 16, 17 years old. And he was like 2 or 3. He was on like, oh my gosh. But he also had a really healthy diet. I kept him mentally stimulated. He had a good social life in terms of dogs, not people.
That means he bites. And
it was interesting. Yeah, but yeah, it is interesting. But yeah.
So how do those meds? How do those meds? Because I'm of the firm belief that if the dog needs medication, it's better to have a short, happy life than a long, miserable one, because that's basically the trade-off. And I know with Lisa, when she was given that option, she was also voted for if he was going to have a short life, which he didn't, but he did not. But he had luckily he had a long, happy one, right? For the most part. But for those people that are, because that's, I don't know how true that is for people either, right? People who are on antidepressants. Right. I don't know.
So there's a difference between like antidepressants. So most people on antidepressants are on SSRIs, and that's what dogs take too for the most part. Right. Although selegiline is that medication for dogs that are having canine cognitive dysfunction, so similar to Alzheimer's. that in humans is actually an antidepressant, but it's in a different category. It's an MAOI, which not many people take that. But anyway, so Xanax and drugs like that are anti-anxiety, people take them, dogs take them. They do have a pretty significant effect on your cognitive function. It's in the class of benzodiazepine. And so over the long term, if you take them long term, you will definitely have some effect on your cognitive. Like the acute effect of taking one, it lowers all your cognitive function, right? So you're operating at a lower level. It decreases your anxiety, but it decreases some other sharpness as well.
You mean the benzos?
The benzos, yes.
Okay.
So, people and, dogs should really avoid taking them on a daily basis unless it's necessary. Obviously, there's cases when it's absolutely necessary. SSRIs, I do not believe there's a relationship between length of life and SSRIs in people. I've not ever heard that.
Yeah.
Anytime you're taking a medication, obviously it's impacting your brain. Now, would you be better off experiencing depression, which, that affects your cognitive function? Sure. Right? Untreated depression, people don't do as well as they get older cognitively.
Yes.
So are they better off, having the effects of that or having the effects of the medication? Well, I mean, if you're going to be happier and have a more fulfilling life on an antidepressant, take the darn antidepressant,
Right.
And it's the same with dogs too, right? I mean, I have a dog on an SSRI, and there are some negative effects of it, but she handles some things a whole lot better on the drug than she does off the drug. So, and there are times I give her Xanax, I mean, fireworks, she gets Xanax.
Yeah. Well, Lisa's dog was on a benzo because it was for heme aggression.
Yeah, he was on amitriptyline, gabapentin, and Prozac.
That's a lot.
Yeah, he was all at low levels. It was a lot, and he was probably on it since 3, and he lived that long. It was, it was like any time now is okay. I mean, I was more concerned about. I was honestly more concerned about like what it was going to do to him, and honestly, towards the end, he was having periodic seizures, right? So, and then some of that stuff, and that was really difficult to deal with. But I mean, overall, he was able, from the time he passed, he was able to walk up and down stairs without a problem. Plus, he had hip dysplasia, moderate dysplasia on top of it. So I was like, okay, I guess you like it here.
Yeah. You talk about difficulty walking up and down stairs, and, arthritis is one of those chronic diseases that people get and dogs get. Women actually get it at a higher rate than men do, but when arthritis starts to affect our ability to exercise, engage in activities that we enjoy doing, our hobbies, that can affect our cognitive function too. So,
and I would bet chronic pain is oxidative stress at its highest, right? I mean, trying to live in that. I'm just going to talk to this one really quick. Jennifer said, what about diet and cognitive health with dogs? You know what, Jennifer, I don't even think diet is a thing that most veterinarians can even speak to because they don't learn it in vet school. So all I'm going to say is we'll stay away from that question. See if you can find a nutritionist. The only thing that I think we have heard from Dr. Legaitis, and I know at least Nancy and I do, I think Lisa might too, is the omegas, right? So we do a fish oil, started early. And I think even in people, right, started at an earlier age can really help benefit the brain. Is that true, Katie, for people?
Yeah. There is some evidence that the omegas, and the preference is to get in the diet. So fish is, the Mediterranean diet includes fish. Like once or twice a week, and that's a good source of omegas. But you can also take supplements. Dogs, you can give fish.
Yeah, sardine. Oh, like on they get a supplement, but they also get like sometimes. As a matter of fact, the other day I gave them some sardines in their
Yeah.
in their
Yeah.
in their food.
Well,
So,
and
which is
Jennifer,
smells
you talked.
terrible. So go ahead.
Sorry, Jennifer, you talked about the book, The Forever Dog. Yeah, that's got some really good stuff in it. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with that?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with it, but
No, me neither.
It's Dr.
So
Karen Becker and Rodney
Karen
Habib.
Becker and Rodney
Very
Habib.
good. Yes.
Yeah, and they have a lot of good information about getting proper nutrition and things the body needs through diet. So if you're looking for that, that's a wonderful. And then she's also got a recipe book coming out that'll be out in I think May. But it's about, and they talk about this is what they spend their life on, and she's an actual veterinarian.
Yep.
That's awesome.
She used to be in this area. She moved to
yeah.
Oh wait, you said Dr. Becker?
Yeah.
Dr. Karen Becker and Rodney Habib.
Yeah.
Nice,
Planet
okay.
Plus. And then they have recipes on different types of stuff. But I also follow them and look at the things that they do, and I'm part of that whole as well. You know, I think nutrition is huge. I think we can do a lot with nutrition, just overall, not just with our dogs, but with ourselves.
And in
right?
people.
Oh yeah.
100%.
And that's why I'm like, I wish I was a dog of mine because my dogs eat better than I do. So
Well, I'm going to say I can speak to the diet thing. I was diagnosed last year with an autoimmune, and my numbers were really up there. I did change my diet. I did adjust it, and I went back for blood work. And while it's not, I'm not, it's gone, but my numbers improved drastically. So I was like, so I was telling Lisa and Joanne, I'm like, let's see if this really works, because I'll be mad if I'm not eating all the stuff I want to, and my numbers are the same. Well, it does work. My numbers are much better. Like, damn it.
There's an app called Yucca. It's Yuka. My sister-in-law just told me about this, and you can scan the what do you call it, the barcode on cosmetics and food, and so it'll give a score between 1 and 100 how good or bad it is, and it does it in terms of like the additives and the ingredients that are in there. Are they harmful enough? But also like things like sugar level and saturated fat, fiber, protein. So it gets kind of addictive after a while. You're like scanning everything in your pantry in your medicine cabinet.
Let's throw that away.
But the good thing is it also tells you what an alternative with a better score is.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Like some of I have like Lubriderm, lotion, and it's like bad 3 out of 100. I'm like, what? Like I'm using lotion that's harmful. Anyway.
Wow.
So I have another nerdy question.
Yes.
And this one I think has been around for a long time. Only general public is starting to hear the word, which is telomeres, right?
Oh yeah, telomeres.
Which is the length of those determine how long you're going to live, but then they're shortening as you age. And so can you talk a little bit about what they are, what you're born with, how that works over the lifespan of a person?
Yeah, so telomeres, so cells have to divide in order for us to keep living. And so in our cells, each of our body cells, we have all of our DNA, right? In the form of 46 chromosomes. And these chromosomes are just little strands of DNA. And on the caps of the chromosomes, there's these thing called telomeres. And every time the cell divides, those telomeres get shorter. But there's evidence that what we do in terms of health habits can shorten or lengthen telomeres. So if, we're doing, all the bad stuff, we're totally sedentary, we're eating, Doritos and whatever.
Pudding.
Yeah. Binge drinking on the weekend, smoking 2 packs a day, then we will experience cell death at a much higher rate, right? I mean, so it kind of, yeah. So there is a correlation between telomere length and our health habits. So, and it affects all body systems, right?
Is that diet like and stress and all of the things?
And stress.
Everything you talked about? Okay.
Yeah.
Exercise and okay.
And yeah, all that stuff. So, and they've actually done experimental studies where they had people exercise, they look at telomere length before and after, this 6 months of exercise. And they used to think that telomeres, they just got shorter. And then once they got too short, cell didn't divide and you were screwed. But now they realize that your health habits can contribute to telomere length. So, yeah, similar. I mean, you see a theme, right? What we eat matters. How we spend
Exercise
our time matters. Huh?
Exercise matters. All those
Exercise
things
matters. And, I mean, some people, you say exercise and they just, like, no, I can't.
I hate the treadmill.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
any kind of movement is better than no movement. So,
yes.
And I think that's where some of that diversity of activity and why it is associated with better health, because better brain health is because to do diverse activities, you have to be moving around more, right? You can't just sit and watch television all day.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, and and Joanne and Lisa know that's a fight I have with my husband, because he tends to be, he could be happy to sit on the couch all day long.
Yeah.
So that's why he retired, and I made him get a job so he can get out and move around a little bit.
Yeah.
It'll be healthy whether you like it or not.
It'll be healthy if it kills you.
Yeah.
And now he's starting to see with my mother-in-law. She never was very active, and now she's kind of bedridden. And now getting her in, like today, the project is getting her in and out of the bed. Moving her from bed to a chair, just changing that up for her, is so important, because it was really good for her, and mentally, it's really made a difference for her.
I mean, physical strength is incredibly important, and we don't tend to think about it when we're younger.
Yes.
But just the ability to get yourself on and off the toilet, in and out of your bed, in and out of a chair.
Yes.
That contributes to your ability to live independently, and that contributes to your brain health. Like, if you are in a bed and reliant on other people, it's not good for brain health.
Right. Mm-hmm. And our dogs too. So let me ask you, I had a just came up. I had a student that she's decided not to continue on with classes because her dog has allergies. So the dog has been exposed to a life of, activity, not crazy activity, but, scent work and all that. And now that dog will not have that any longer. So I guess my question, how does that affect mental health when the dog, just like people let's say a person had a very active lifestyle and then for whatever reason can no longer do it? Does that change how they age? How does that, or how their brain changes?
I mean, I think we could probably all answer that question. I mean, sure,
Yeah.
I mean, dogs can get depressed. I mean, some dogs would be depressed in that situation, and some would be like your husband and go, finally, I get back and do nothing, right? So,
I know, he gets really excited when I'm home all weekend.
So, I mean, but for some dogs, I mean, they would get depressed, and hopefully she has a plan for continuing to do some things with her dogs. I mean, there's lots of enriching things that don't involve going to classes.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, and
I mean, I would just encourage that,
Right. Just do some searches around the house or in the house.
Sure. Or go for walks and let them search for food, throw some food on the ground, and, something.
Tricks are really good for cognitive health too, right? It's sort of like learning the new skills and
the what?
Learning new tricks, right?
Sure.
It's to me, right? You're learning new skills and then the bigger your repertoire, right? Then you're having to, it's that different piece, right? Where you're having to recall what you've learned and then bring that back to the forefront, right?
Right.
Yep. So Catherine asked a really interesting question. She said that her older dog was able to still manipulate his puzzles and everything else normally up until his, into his senior years, but then would be other parts like he would forget where the door was to go outside and things like that. But yet, working the puzzles were totally fine. So is that because of it, if it's because it's operating in a different part of the brain, or?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a general principle that when the more well-learned something is, so like things that we're expert in are the things that are going to go last. Like we're going to hang on to that knowledge very readily. So something the dog knows well, they're less likely to decline in that area. But I think finding the door, maybe it's because it's a visual spatial type of task. I
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, and maybe the puzzle is a little bit different.
Or he enjoys it more, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. There's a tool out there for dogs that you suspect might have canine cognitive
Oh yes.
dysfunction.
Yes.
It's called DISHA, so DISHAA, and each of the letters stand for a different area of cognition. So one of the areas does have to do with spatial
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
I can't remember what all the things.
Yeah, but it is a different part of your brain that probably works that out.
I mean, I don't know what kind of puzzles.
I think like food puzzles and things like that.
Food puzzles. It might just be a little more motivating. Like
that's
getting
true.
to the food versus getting outside to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that.
Yeah. So.
Well, because I had one of my min pins did have a problem with a little bit of cognition as she got older, and then I put her on Life, and that seemed to really make a huge difference for her. And she then she didn't lose any more of her, she stayed pretty with it till she died. Yeah.
I mean, the dogs that have that canine cognitive dysfunction, they decline a lot more rapidly than what normal cognitive loss goes a lot slower.
Yeah.
Until you get to the very end of life, and then there's a steep drop off. But
I didn't know that existed. That's really interesting as kind of a scoring function to for your vet. You can take it to your vet, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's nice. I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah. No, it gives you it helps people measure, because sometimes it's hard to know, like, is this too much, or so it just helps you measure it,
right.
See how they handle that.
Yeah. So just one more thing. I know that like when Katie and I were talking, and I know Katie participates in it with a couple of my other students, because sometimes they ask like, hey, it's time for us to do our new thing. Can we use the building? Which is the dog aging project. Yeah. And I know sort of before we went live, Katie was saying to us, they're moving from laboratory mice and laboratory dogs more to pet dogs. Because our brains are so similar. So Katie, can you go into a little bit, if people haven't heard of it, what the Dog Aging Project is and what you do for that?
Yeah, so you can actually just Google the Dog Aging Project. I don't know. I think they are taking new dogs on a rolling basis. I don't know if they've cut that off, but I think they are still accepting new dogs.
I actually enrolled my one dog in it. So they are, they are definitely still looking for people.
And you can only enroll one of the dogs living in your house. And so anyway, the idea is to try to understand how dogs age, describe the aging process. Um, and the idea is to collect data via the dog owners. So as a dog owner, they send me, like, I have in my inbox a cognitive task I'm supposed to do with my dogs. And so I do this task with my dogs. I collect the data that they asked me to collect, and then I send it in. And so the idea is, to try to determine, since dogs and people share the same environment, the idea is that, and we share the same basic brain structures and all of that, that by understanding what happens with dogs, we'll not only understand how to help dogs as they age, but we'll also understand human aging better. And the kinds of things that we're exposed to as humans, given where we live, the idea is our dogs would also be exposed to that. So that's why it's a better sort of situation than like a laboratory dog that's living in an environment that's doesn't have all
Sterile.
the stuff. Yeah, it's a very sterile environment, and they only get exposed to whatever the study decides to expose them to. So
Right.
it's kind of nice to get away from those laboratory studies of beagles. I mean, I don't feel so much for the mice, but the beagles, yeah.
Well,
Not
I have one that was supposed to be that was a breeding beagle for those.
Yeah.
For those. So she's
Yeah.
a stinker though. But yes, she was very stressed out. But now she's very naughty.
Yeah. Well, she's a beagle.
Yeah. On a side note about that, let's hope. I know Carolyn, who is our resident beagle fanatic, right, posted something that the Beagle Freedom Project, which rescues research beagles, they just shut down, I think it was like a 400 dog breeding facility. And the breeding facility actually sold the building to Beagle Freedom Project. So now they're going to use it for training and housing and education, I think. So
nice.
Yeah, hopefully the rest of the world continues down that path.
Yeah. And that's where she came from. Actually, that facility that they closed down is where my beagle came from. So,
no, this one was just this week.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because this one was the one this week. Because it was in Virginia, the one that Roomba came from. No, this one. Because it sounds awfully familiar. I was like,
I think there's so many of them, right?
Yeah.
Possible.
Yeah, there's more than one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because she came from the breeding facility. This might be just the real lab place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's different. Yeah, she came from the breeding facility. She did not come from where they were doing actual testing or whatever on them. Anyway, this was really helpful, and because we, we have a lot of dogs that are aging at our, that's part of the gig, right? As we train dogs, they start to get older and all that. And it's, for us, it really is helpful to be able to support our clients and for people to understand that this is, they get very sad or upset when the dog starts to lose a little bit of decline. And also, but and one of the things that they do is not want the dogs to do anything, just want to keep the dog at home. And it's like, no, sometimes they need a little extra something, or they need some activities to keep them going and keep them mentally with it, right? Even if it may not be as fast as they once were, but none of us are as we get older.
Well, yeah. I mean, and keep them happy too, right? I mean, if the dog really loves doing something, you certainly don't want to stop doing that with them.
Well, and it's so funny that you mentioned that, it's the stuff they do that they really enjoy. They that's the last thing they lose. I remember my lab Kaiser that he did agility and he loved it. We weren't superstars at it, but he enjoyed it. And I remember towards the end of his life, I just put him on the ground and just ran around a little bit. And he was just thrilled to be able to do that at the end of his, towards the end of his life. So it was really, it's kind of cool to see and know that, it wasn't, we kept, cause we just jumped him at a lower height as he got older. And then of course he got to the point where there was none of that, but, but yeah, thank you so much for all your information. This was great because I know it's part of, we always talk about the training and the puppies and the adolescents, but we also got to kind of keep our wits about us with the seniors and kind of supporting them and how they age as well. So anyway, thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Katie.
you.
All right. Thank you guys. Bye.